Okay, so we get started with creating some boilerplate HTML pages with some of the more simpler HTML elements that look pretty ugly. So let's style it now. We can style it using plain old CSS, and we can extend it and use some of the bootstrap libraries. And so Bootstrap is a library that was designed to make it easy to apply styling without starting from scratch. Okay, so after folks have done this from scratch for several years, they've identified certain patterns, they've identified some very useful utilities, and they've captured all these into a very nice reusable library. There's quite a few of these libraries hanging around. Android's material design is library is certainly one of the leading ones, and you're welcome to use that. Or if you prefer a Bootstrap, either one is fine. Although you should follow the same functionality, the same requirements of white spaces, and good practice should be applied either with whatever library you end up using. Right? Here I'm going to cover Bootstrap. Right? So Bootstrap. You can either download it, right, and install it locally on your machine, right, and just referencing it from within your browser or your HTML document, or you can reference it through a CDN. Right, CDN, a content delivery network, is a place where very common resources are shared for large amounts of people, right? So that so instead of everybody having a copy of the same library all the time, instead there are these repositories that are holding these very common resources. Like for instance, Bootstrap is very common. jQuery, all these libraries are very, very common. Instead of everybody copying it locally into their machines, it's better to just have it in one single place. Everybody downloads it from there. Some folks might say, well, wouldn't that make it slower? Okay. Now, not quite, because that styling, those libraries are either going to be downloaded from your server, or they're going to be downloaded from somebody else's server. Nevertheless, they're always going to be downloaded. Okay. And chances are that those other servers, those CDNs, typically are much more common than your server. Right, so what the browser does is that if it sees that it already has downloaded a particular file, it won't download it again. Right, you'll see that, I already have that file. I'm not going to bother downloading it again. Right? And so chances are that they have visited other websites that are more popular than yours. Right, the people have been going to Facebook or Twitter and whatnot, all these other websites that are most certainly more popular than yours. Okay. And these websites are using these CDNs. Okay, so chances are that the browser, by the time it comes to you, right, chances are that they have already downloaded jQuery. They have already downloaded Bootstrap. They have already downloaded materials. So they're not going to bother downloading it again. Okay, so they already have the libraries that you would expect that they're already there. So if you've referenced the same CDNs, you're actually making your particular website faster than if you were hosting it yourself. Okay? The other concern that folks might be worried is that, well, if I'm not hosting it myself, what if their server goes down and then my website is broken? Well, chances are that they are much more worried about being up than you are, right? So they're certainly making sure that their uptime is much more of an issue than you are putting your efforts into. So chances are that they're going to be up when you're not. So here's just one CDN. There's lots and lots of these CDNs hanging around. This is just one of them, Bootstrap CDN. It hosts lots and lots of different libraries, including Bootstrap. But Font Awesome is here as well. Materials is here. jQuery is here. Lots and lots of them are there. Google is also a very common CDN. It has all their libraries. All their competitor libraries are there as well. So yeah, best practice is to use a CDN. Now, for development purposes, you might want to download it anyway, right? But only for development purposes. The benefit of downloading it and having it a copy on your local machine is that your IDE will parse those CSS or those jQuery, those other libraries, and it'll provide for you, code completion, right? So that as you type, right, it will parse the CSS, it will code complete, as you type, which is very nice, right? But that only works if you download the CSS and the libraries down to your local development environment. So for development, it's okay to have a copy. But for production, once you are done developing and you're going to package this and put it into production, ideally you would use instead the CDNs. Make sense? Okay. So for development, it's okay, but for production, it should be CDNs. All right. Yeah, just a couple of things. So one of the things is that originally, very early on when the web came out, and when phones started to render pages, the content typically was designed to be consumed in large desktop windows, right? CRTs, right? So when you looked at it on a phone, right, what the phone would do, the default behavior is to scale down the page so that it would fit on a small screen. Right? So folks would have to maybe enlarge so they could read anything because it was so small. Right? So that's a very common thing. Now today, typically you would design the page so that it would behave would display one way when it's a desktop, but it would display completely different when it's accessed by a phone, right? So typically it would already be aware that it's being rendered either by a desktop or phone. And when it's on a phone, typically it would scale it so that it's actually readable on a phone, right? Basically eliminating the necessity for you to zoom in or zoom out. Okay? So typically, if your page is aware, right, that it's on a phone, typically we would turn off the behavior that you could zoom in and zoom out because we already scaled it for you. You shouldn't have to zoom in and zoom out. Make sense? So you do that by adding a meta tag in the head of the HTML document, all right, telling it that you want the initial scale to be 1, meaning I don't want you to be zooming in or out. Okay, just keep it at 1. Okay. So in Bootstrap, we will load and make Bootstrap available, and it has quite a few classes, right, that you can apply to your elements. In this particular case, here's a class. A class is how you apply a particular style that has a particular name to an element, right? In this case, the class is called Container Fluid, and it adds responsive behavior to your content. It adds some padding all around. By default, the browser makes everything flush with the outside container of the window. It looks pretty ugly, right? So Container Fluid adds a little padding so that it looks a little better on the screen. So let's take a look at that. Let's install Bootstrap. So let's go to our web store, and let's apply it to perhaps our login page. So let's go to login, and let's add Bootstrap to this. Okay. So first of all, let's fix a couple of things. Here, this should be an HTML. This would be maybe head, and this maybe is body. Okay, my IDE really wants this to be like that. Okay. So let's copy this whole thing and let's put it in the body. Let's go to our page, our login. It still looks the same, right? Nothing has changed. So let's add Bootstrap. Let's grab it from one of the CDNs. So we can look it up, Bootstrap CDN. So there it is. So it found it. Bootstrap. There it is. We can copy from here. You can also take a look at the documentation. The documentation is available at getbootstrap.com. I strongly encourage you to become familiar with this documentation. Read through it, see what's there. Right? You don't have to memorize it, but at least just to make a mental note of what is there, so you can come back later, perhaps as, ooh, I think I saw something in Bootstrap. Instead of reinventing the wheel, right? It's better if you can come here and make use of what's already there. So for instance, you might have all sorts of content elements, component elements that of how to style buttons, different buttons that are available, forms that render them from top to bottom like this, or are responsive so that they can render from left to right. Where are they? From left to right. And that as you make the window smaller, they automatically switch so that they're responsive. So they already provide all these behavior. They also provide elements to style, big, markety kinds of content with a big call to action and some of the hero images and whatnot. Allows you to render lists, items in a nicely styled, separated by vertical lines, horizontal lines. Navigations for instance, tabs that can be rendered horizontally or vertically. And you have here are the tabs or pills, right? That can be rendered again horizontally or vertically, or vertically somewhere here somewhere. Vertically here. Also, if you load their jQuery, because Bootstrap also has a jQuery library, you can create some very simple navigation and display different content, as you click through these. Again, make use of these widgets that are already built for you, right? Bootstrap already creates this that are very useful for developers, right? So they don't have to create something from scratch. Okay. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of things. I encourage you to go through this, right, and see what's already there that you can reuse, right? Okay, so let's bring the CDN. So I'm going to copy the CSS. There it is, copy. And from my login page, we're just going to load it using the link. So link allows you to refer to other documents that this document depends on. Notice that it's declared as part of the head element. And so in the link, you can say, hey, there's this other document that this document needs. So load that. There it is. And we need to tell it what type is it, right? Because there's a whole bunch of types of documents that I can load. So we can say REL. Relative, and we say that it's style sheet. Right, so it's a style sheet that I'm going to load. So if I load my CSS again, my login, and notice that already looks a little prettier, right? It changed the font, but notice that all the content is flush to the outside window. So that's where container classes come in, right? That allow you to add padding around this whole thing and add some spaces all around the content. So for instance, my entire login, we can wrap around with a div. So this entire content, my entire content, there's my div. And then we can apply a particular class that is described or implemented by Bootstrap. One of them is a container. Just plain old container. If we do that and we render, let's bring this to 100%. That's 100%. Notice what happens here is that we have some padding on the left-hand side. See that? And what happens is that as I change the size, notice that it has a little. What it's doing is that it's looking at the size of the width of the page, right? And depending on the size of the width, it's going to, it defines certain breakpoints, right? And it says, you're going through a very large window to a medium-sized window to a small window to a very small window, right? And I'm going to apply different styling as you transition between the different breakpoints, okay? And that's how Bootstrap implements support for responsive design, right? It targets 4 different types of sizes of window, very typical sizes of windows, right? Depending on the monitor sizes that are currently very popular today, okay? So for instance, when it gets to the smallest one, it just gives up and it just It's just that's the smallest that it'll ever go. Okay. All right. So let's bring that up. If you don't like those breakpoints as shown there, you can use instead container fluid. Oops, container fluid. Container fluid just adds a wrap around it, just so that it's not flush with the outside, and it doesn't define the breakpoints. Okay. So I'm going to stick with container fluid, and let me bring that up a little bit. Okay. All right, so let's style a couple of things here. One of the things that we can style here is at the input fields, we can provide a class with the input field. A very common style that you can add to the input fields is the form control. Form. Notice that it's not doing any type ahead, right? So I need to remember what those are. I think it's form control. There we go. Because I didn't download the CSS. Instead, I'm using the CDN. Let's see if I got it right. There it is. OK, so that's the input field. What it's doing is that it converts it into a block element. So it becomes as big as the outside container. So it takes on the entire width of the page. It adds some rounding around the corners. And it's also it becomes small as this becomes small. So it looks a little nicer. So let's add the same class to the password. Okay, so there's a form control for the password. There it is. Another one that for the button, if we read through the documentation, we can add classes also for the buttons. We can say that this is a button, BTN. If we refresh, this takes on the default styling, which has no background. Or you can give it one of the most common styling. We can say that this is a button primary. So it becomes blue. So what Bootstrap does is declares 4 or 5 very common names of style themes, right? So it declares like primary, danger, alert, information, things like that, success. So for instance, primary color, they're using the color blue. You can and here we have 2 styles being applied to this. Right? So there's 2 classes applied to the same button. We can also add button block. Button block converts this into a block element, meaning take up the entire width of the page and add a vertical spacing around it. Okay, so it pushes everything down. Let's see what else. All right. One critique that I have for Bootstrap is typically whenever libraries are declaring declaring classes, ideally these classes would prepend something in front of them so that you know that these are classes defined by Bootstrap, right, or defined by you, or defined by whoever. Okay. So for instance, if this were a class defined by us, right, maybe we would choose webdev, button or something like that. All right. And typically this would be maybe an acronym or some identifying a unique identifier for your organization. Okay. I'm guessing the reason that they didn't do it is that they would have to have to use BS or something, Bootstrap, and I guess they didn't want to go with that. All right, so another couple of things here is that here we have the link of the remote classes that we are using to style this, and you can look at the styling. You can see the styling that they've chosen. For instance, you can right-click and inspect the elements. Let's inspect and put it on the right-hand side and see exactly what they did. Right, so this is going to be your best new friend. Your new best friend, sorry. Sorry, my English is not my first language. So here's our button, and notice the BTN and the button primary, and you can see exactly what Bootstrap did to style these. See that? You can see that button block, they use display block with 100%. Button primer, here's the background color and the color. You can actually play around with the color that you want. Right? You can click on it and choose a different color. Right? If you don't like that particular color, you can choose another one. So let's say we want to use this orange. Okay, we can grab that and we can override whatever styling Bootstrap is using. Right? So for instance, we can grab this .btn primary. And we come here, right, and say that the style, our own style, we can declare our own BTN. We can use the same rule here, BTN primary. You can grab that, the same rule. This says I am declaring a new class rule, which has the name BTN primary, meaning anybody who uses this style, I'm going to declare the following transformation. I want to convert the background color, I want to convert it to this color right here. Okay. Notice that if this is not here, and we refresh the page, it'll come back to the original, right? So whatever changes I have are only local to the browser, right? But if I declare it here, oops, sorry. There we go. What happens here is that first, the link above declares its own rules, right? And then down below, I'm overriding wherever Bootstrap says, because I am closer to the element that is being referenced, right? Who's referencing this? Well, this button is referencing it, right? So this button is referencing button primary. Typically, it would use Bootstrap's class, but because I've redefined it after Bootstrap, right, it will override whatever Bootstrap says, right? So we can, if we re-render, notice that it takes mine over Bootstrap. If instead I declare it before, notice that Bootstrap wins because I declare it and then Bootstrap redefines it again, right? So whoever's closest to the element wins, right? Or I can be very, very close. The closest I could ever be to an element is to declare it right on the element. Right, you can say background color, and we say green. Right, so this overrides everybody else. So I first declare it orange, then Bootstrap declares it blue, and then I finally declare it as green. Okay, so declaring you can use style and declare right on the element, but never do that. That's a very bad practice. Right, declaring and overriding styling right on an element. Right, your fellow developers will hate you. Okay, so don't ever do that. Instead, the better alternative would be to declare it on a style. Right, instead here, we remove the style. You might do this maybe to play around yourself and see what it might look like locally. But once you've played around enough, you would remove it, right, and make it permanent on a style here. Right, so there's orange. Right, but not even here. This is also considered to be bad practice, declaring it inside of a document. Right, because if this is a style that you want to reuse multiple times, you would have to copy this style element all over your pages. Right? So instead, the better practice is to declare it in your own file. So for instance, you would declare maybe a style, a CSS file, and call it maybe, if this is styling only the login page, then you would declare maybe in login, .style.client.css. If it's specific to this one page, you would declare style specific to this one page. And you would declare this rule, perhaps, in here. Right? And then you would you would link and refer to your CSS. You would say href. And there's our style, there it is. Also is a style sheet. Okay, so notice that it has the same effect, right? Notice that Bootstrap first defined it, we overrode it, right? And we win over because we're closest to the element. So this is specific to this file. Any styling that's specific to this style. If it's a style that is common across multiple pages, then you would perhaps declare it in a dedicated style.css, where you would declare styling that is common to all of them. Actually, no. Let's leave it here. Oops. Let's leave it here. And you would declare it here, right? So this might declare it as green. And so in your HTML here, you would load both. You would link and load your style sheets, right? And style sheet. Here we go. So this is saying, first load the base styling, right, that I want to use for the overall project. Here are my overrides, my specific overrides, because I don't like the round corners. I don't like the theme, right? So I might change my buttons to different color. And then these are the overrides for this specific page, right? So very high level, lower, right? And then very specific. Yes? Right? And again, the closest one wins. Make sense? All right. What else? Okay, so we applied some styling here. Let's do the same thing maybe for the user admin.